The half-court press is a little bit like the position of the defense of the dark arts role in Harry Potter. The hosts just keep changing. So we are now on, I think, the 6th iteration of this group, Wilson. Hello, everybody. I'm Sam McKewon. I'm here with Wilson Moore. I won't be here forever because we are in the process of trying to hire a Creighton beat writer. But our previous Creighton beat writer was Joel Lorenzi, and he is now, I think tonight, covering an Oklahoma City Thunder game, right?
Yeah, I think remotely. I don't think he's on the road, but I think he is in Oklahoma as we speak.
That's right. He's remotely, and apparently he went to Whataburger, and we love Joel, and we wish him the best in his new role covering the Thunder down in Oklahoma. But he's no longer on this podcast. So I'm sort of filling in for a short time. Wilson obviously is here with us. He covers Nebraska basketball. They have their exhibition on Sunday. Creighton's isn't until next Friday. Why it's next Friday, I don't know. It doesn't make any difference, but the reality is it's next Friday. Hello, everyone. This is the Half Court Press Podcast. How are you, Wilson?
I'm doing well.
Good.
How are you?
Well, we've had a lot, we're in the midst of trying to hire, somebody to have this podcast with you. And I think we're going to get we have tons of great candidates. We're going to be, we'll be finding one here quite soon. This is, again, like the 6th iteration of this because it started a couple years ago with Chris Heddy and John Niatawa. And then Chris left, and then John left. And so for a while, I think it was just kind of John Niatawa and maybe Dirk Chatwin. And then John left, and then Jimmy got here, and then Jimmy and Joel did it, and then Jimmy left, and then it was Joel and Dirk, and then Dirk left, and then it was Joel and me, and then you came, and it was Joel and you, and now Joel's left. And these are all good things. Everybody has gone on to do bigger and better things, Like people have loved those jobs, and that's what we do here. So we've loved it, but it is a little bit like the defense of the dark arts position. So here we are. We're 5 days out from the exhibition game that Nebraska's going to play against. Who are they playing? Doane.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you know where Doane is, Wilson?
Oh man, you're exposing me as not a real Nebraskan.
Most people don't know where Doane is. Okay, it's in Creighton, Nebraska. You know what? You know what's cool about Doane is you, in theory, could drive out there. You could drive the 15 miles from Lincoln to Creighton. Just go down Highway 77. You go off. You're at Doane as fast as that.
I have been to Creighton, Nebraska. I was.
Why? And not to go to Doane.
No, it wasn't. It was actually I played on this club baseball team in college at Missouri. Nebraska was in our. Was in our conference, and we had a series over the weekend in Nebraska, but like the field they usually use in Lincoln, I don't know what. I didn't have any Nebraska knowledge at this point. But there was like a Legion tournament or something going on there, so we couldn't play in Lincoln, so we played in Crete for a weekend.
Okay. I think Wannix of Crete is closed. I can't remember. Maybe it's still open. But they have a Runza there and a few other things. They also have a university, Doane University, and they're the ones who are coming to play Nebraska. We're not going to talk a lot about Doane or necessarily about the exhibition game. We're going to talk a lot about rosters. And we're going to start with Nebraska's roster, and then we'll move to Creighton, which was at Big East Media Days yesterday, and one of the favorites to win the league. I mean, they're not the favorite. That's Marquette. But they're one of the favorites, and there's a good reason why. It's because they have good basketball players. And we'll go over Creighton's roster on the back half of this Half Court Press podcast. I want to remind everybody to subscribe to the Omaha World-Herald. Right now, it is, what is today? October 25th?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
It's Wednesday.
You can get 6 months of the Omaha World-Herald for $1. And today is October 25th. If you add 6 and subtract whatever, because, the months switch and the calendar switches and all that, it'll go all the way through April. So when Creighton and Nebraska play each other for the national championship and and the NCAA national championship, you'll get all that coverage. And you'll get the first couple weeks of the transfer portal. So anybody who wants to follow Creighton or Nebraska basketball, the best place to do that is at the Omaha World-Herald, www.omaha.com/subscribe, www.omaha.com/subscribe. Okay, let's get into it. Nebraska basketball, this roster is interesting. right? So it's a combination of guys who had already been there, and then a bunch of old, seasoned transfers. And when you went up to Big Ten Media Days, Wilson, you talked a little bit and wrote a good story about what it means to have old, seasoned transfers, especially from schools that have had more success than Nebraska, which is true in this case. I want to start, first of all, with just the general overview of what you see as the roster. So if I was going to say to you, Wilson, what do you think this group of guys, irrespective of their positions, could do well, that is?
I think this is a really kind of flexible, malleable group. I know Fred Hoiberg has talked about how he likes the different lineups he can go to. They can play a lot bigger than they could a year ago, because Rink Mast is a guy who shoots the three ball really well. Josiah Alec didn't as much last year, but he has a past of shooting, kind of mid-30s on three, so they can play those guys. Jawan Gary at like the three, and have a real big, heavy rebounding lineup. I think they can also go small. I think Bryce Williams he's a guard. He's 6'7". I think in theory you could plug him in as like a small ball stretch four. So I think it's a lot of different directions, a lot of different iterations you could see of this team. And I think ultimately it's going to be a team that, like I mentioned, shoots the three a little better than it did last year, and maybe has the potential to play with a little more pace than it did.
So the Big Ten's full of teams that do different stuff. When you say versatile, I think of the difference between, so the top two teams in the Big Ten, according to most people, are Purdue and Michigan State. Those teams aren't similar. They do very different things. Yeah. Purdue's going to be centered on its center. Michigan State's going to kind of pace and space. They push the pace a lot, and quite frankly, they've gotten to the point where they're shooting almost as many threes as Iowa. I mean, that's just who they are. And so it takes different things to play those teams. Historically, Nebraska's struggled against both. Yeah. And I'd say they're both on the polls. They've struggled against both, so I understand what you mean by that. When you look at the roster again, just generally speaking, what are the things that you would be concerned about?
I think defense is always going to be a question. They they went out and got some real skilled offensive players in the portal, but which isn't to say guys like Rink Mast and Bryce Williams do have reputations as good defenders. It's just a little. It gets a little harder to plug them in at a certain point. It's I think defense is generally just a little harder to predict. And then there's also I think point guard is a question, and that could be Jamarcus Lawrence, who the coaches are pretty high on, shifting from kind of the two guard, and then Jaron Coleman are the two options there. I don't think both are solid. Both definitely have things they do well, but neither are, I think, the kind of slam dunk portal acquisitions that someone like Mast was, where it's just, okay, we bring him in and he can immediately help the team.
Right. And neither one of them, I think, are push the pace guys. Neither was Sam Griesel. Yeah. I mean, Sam Griesel wasn't, flying up the floor. He kind of, he would kind of modulate tempo and things like that. So I think that's notable. Okay, let's get into the roster a little bit. Let's start with the backcourt. And there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of names to cycle through. They lost Griesel. That is somebody who's gone. They return a lot of the rest of it. Not maybe all of it, but a lot of it. And I do feel like in some ways it starts with Casey. How would you describe his game?
Take a three from anywhere on the court. He can also get this year how he responds to having more of a reputation. Nebraska knows he can score, and so does how that affects how defenses play him, how he responds to different defenses.
What I like about Casey is, there's a couple things. Obviously, he's pretty comfortable with the shot. Yeah. In college, it doesn't tend to be. Like, a lot of times guys are not great on corner threes. They like to be kind of above the, whatever you want to call it. And he's got 30-foot range. But the thing that I really like about his game is if you go all the way 3 or 4 times a game, and he would get fouled, you can't just go out there and smother his game. Okay, so there's people around him. So Casey's going to start. Yeah. I don't think he's going to be a bench guy.
No.
So then you've got all these other names that we can work through. Jamarcus Lawrence. Jerron Coleman, I think people are going to end up calling him Boogie.
Yeah,
right? 'Cause that's kind of the
whenever
same.
we're able to talk to him, we'll have to ask what he prefers to go by. But yeah,
Sam Hoiberg, who had some inspiring moments last year, really, truly. Like he's better than, I think his dad, the coach, maybe sandbagged him a little bit. He should have been playing more. But that's the way it goes. Ramel Lloyd, we don't know a ton about him.
no.
Cale Jacobson, or is he a guard? We can get into that. And then the guy, we don't know what's going on with Aaron Eulis. What am I missing, and what do you think of that group?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of an eclectic group. I think you brought up Cale Jacobson. I think he's a really interesting piece because, we haven't seen him in any action in college, but by all indications, he's better than an average walk-on. And I really think someone who can contribute, maybe not a ton, but, someone who you can at least trust with the ball in his hands. Another interesting piece, we touched on him earlier, but Jamarcus Lawrence, I'm really interested in what his year 2 looked like. I think he showed a lot of promise as a freshman, especially kind of getting thrown into the fire, going from kind of out of the rotation to starting by the end of the season. I'm interested in seeing how he handles moving from off the ball to having the ball in his hands, having to run the offense, having to think. He talked about this when we talked with him a few weeks ago about having to kind of shift his mindset from I'm looking for my own shot to I have to run the offense and get everyone else involved. Yeah, Ramel Lloyd, kind of a question mark. He's working through.
He's banged up.
Yeah, working through like a leg or a knee injury, something like that. I don't know how much he was really going to be a part of things regardless. He obviously didn't play it much last year. And Jerron Coleman is he's kind of similar to Lawrence in that he's got a different role than he did last year at Ball State. His job was to score 18 points a game. That's not going to be what his job is in Nebraska. He's a guy who they're expecting to have to run the offense and get teammates involved, and that's going to be kind of a shift in his mentality.
So I agree with you that I describe Casey as a guard. He's not a wing really, but he's a scorer.
Yeah.
Lawrence probably can be a scorer, but they're going to probably ask him to be their best defender.
Yeah.
That'd be my hunch. Coleman, we'll see. Eulis, we don't know if he's going to play.
Yeah.
We don't know. He's the guy that's he's not pleaded guilty to charges related to gambling. It sounds like, though, that's a guy that's helped them and would be helpful if he can play. We just don't know what the NCAA is going to say. Is that kind of where it's at?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I don't know how much of a precedent there really is for this, when we've
Just
had
the football players.
Yeah, and if you get into like the NCAA bylaws, I forget the exact phrasing it uses, but it says, if you gamble on, obviously paraphrasing here, but a sport involving your own school, not your own sport, but your own school, that's like grounds for having all of your eligibility taken away. It didn't say that's you do lose all your eligibility, but it says you can lose all your eligibility. I don't know how much that distinction matters, if at all. But yeah, it leaves him as a question mark.
It does. Let's go to the wings now, and I separate guards and wings a little bit based on ball handling and just whatever. The wings: C.J. Wilcher, Bryce Williams, Eli Rice, and maybe Cale Jacobson. I don't really know. And then what the hell? We'll put Juwan Gary in that group too, because Juwan shoots a lot of threes, too many.
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, he can play the 4, he can play the 5, but he's also going to play the 3 at times.
Yeah.
What do you think of that group?
It's interesting you mentioned Juwan Gary. That's a guy who's worked hard over the offseason on his three-point stroke. Remember, Fred told us it was his left shoulder he injured, so he had all offseason to get shots up with his right. I think Bryce Williams, the guy who was going to step in and be a major contributor right away. He has all the tools. He's a proven good shooter at Charlotte. He's got the size to be to contribute on the defensive end.
Likeable guy.
Yeah, very
likable.
Very mature guy. Both talks and looks much older than he is. Who else did you mention?
C.J. Wilcher.
C.J. Wilcher, yeah.
And C.J. doesn't do a lot of ball handling.
Yeah, no.
I think he's gotten better there.
Yeah.
He doesn't lose the ball as much as he used to, but he's a three-point shooter. And he got hot at times
Yeah.
during their winning streak last year.
Yeah.
Eli Rice.
Eli Rice, really interesting to me because I know as a general rule of thumb, it's take the foreign tours with a grain of salt, but he was very good. I mean, we don't have video, but just based strictly on box scores and recollections of other people who were there, he was very good in Spain. And
it was Spain.
Yeah, and obviously Nebraska didn't have a full team at that point. Casey wasn't there. Sam Hoiberg was
masked. So they had to rely more on Rice.
Yeah. But yeah, he stepped up, and I'm interested in what he can do as a freshman.
Yeah, I think that he probably had a bigger role there than he will have at all this season. And so the question becomes, how do you handle a smaller role, and what is it?
Yeah.
Is that role to come in and hit a couple of shots? Is that role to come in and be a stopper for a couple of possessions? I know that's how they used Denham Dawson for the brief time that Denham Dawson was here before he left. It's like, well, his job is going to be to come in and play defense and do this and that, maybe get to the line, but Eli Rice appears to be a more skilled player. Let's go to the post, and this is interesting. Yeah. So you have Rink Mast, you have Josiah Alec. We can talk about Gary here too, because I think he's going to do some of that. Blaze Keita, who we know very little about his health, and maybe we'll learn more Friday when Hoiberg talks. But that's kind of it. And Matar Job. So those four plus Gary, who's going to play in a little bit in there.
Yeah.
Interesting group.
Very interesting group. Chop is fascinating to me. A late addition to the team who, by all accounts of, Fred and talking to teammates, is one of, if not the most athletic guys on the team.
Right.
Someone was, I think it was Fred talking about early on, he pinned a shot like high off the backboard that Juwan Gary put up. One of the fastest guys on the teams apparently, can beat the guards down the court in a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much he's gonna contribute right away. I mean, by all indications, he's a guy who can step in and get rebounds and protect the rim right away. His offensive game is a little more of a work in progress.
And in this league, those two things you need.
Yeah.
Maybe not in every league, but in the Big Ten, you need a guy that can come and do those things. Maybe it's only for 7 minutes. One of the frustrations I know they had with Eduardo Andre, and Andre was a similar athlete. Yeah. He's now at, where is he at? Fresno State. They just didn't feel like he was very consistent in both on the offensive end, but also on the defensive end, that he'd have great possessions and then he'd have frustrating ones. Yeah. If Job can come in and give them 7 to 9 minutes and maybe take away 2 possessions, each half, where a team would have scored, but they don't because he's there. I think that's what do you call it? That's 6 to 8 points saved.
Yeah.
And that may be the role that he has. Blaze Keita certainly can do that too. He was their best defensive ratings player last year, but he's been hurt a lot.
Yeah, and if he's out, that'll probably open the door, force Chop into more action. Yeah, Keita's a weird situation because he had an ankle procedure that is not super uncommon for guys, and for whatever reason is just not respond. His body hasn't responded. His ankle hasn't healed as quickly as I think anyone was expecting. So when we talked to Fred on Friday, I imagine we'll get an update on him, but it's been kind of a pretty slow going for his recovery.
Alex, a passion guy.
And you can tell that in the way he plays and the way he talks and the way he photobombs the camera after the volleyball game last week. Yeah, he's going to play hard. He's going to play physically. He talked about that at media days, how he feels his job is to, be physical and get his teammates ready. He talked about slamming into Eli Rice every time a shot goes up to get him ready. And he's I think kind of a similar game to Juwan Gary, and just that kind of, maybe a little stylistically different, but just the idea of just attacking the boards, being relentless, being physical, playing hard. And to your point about, if you need someone who can protect the rim, everyone needs a guy or two like that, and I think that's Alec.
He is going to be a guy in the Big Ten who pisses off the other team.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think you need one of those too.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll be really honest with you. I don't know that Nebraska's had one of those guys, and these are not names that you're familiar with, but I'm not sure they've had a guy like that since Michael Jacobson. Like they haven't had a lot of guys that can just bug the other team the way that I think Alec can, and he does that with his passion, with his fire. He's going to take charges that are going to tick other teams off. He's going to make a play, and he's going to be happy about it. I can just imagine like Iowa or Wisconsin. If I was going to pick a guy on Nebraska's team that might, look over at Fran McCaffrey when Fran McCaffrey's doing what Fran McCaffrey always does, it would probably be Josiah Alec.
Yeah.
Like he'd be like, yeah, that's right. Like, when McCaffrey gets mad. So that's interesting. I think Alec, and then Mast. Mast is enormously important. They run a lot of the offense, obviously, through the center. When Derek Walker was the center, there were a couple things he was really good at. One thing he was really good at was getting the ball right sort of on that, whatever Fred calls it, the nail, the hinge, whatever you want to call it. The nail is in the middle of the free throw line. He would also get it right on the high right block or whatever. And he just skilled. He could move the ball with his hands, and he could get it to where he needed it. He was a gifted passer. The other thing Derek was really good at is he would be able to turn from his back to the basket, square up, create space when he did, and then nobody wanted to F with him when he drove because he was 260 pounds and he was skilled. He was pretty fast. And so when he plays Kalkbrenner last year, and Kalkbrenner is a great defensive player. He's one of the best defensive players in college basketball. If he plays in the NBA, it will be because of that. And he went right into Kalkbrenner's chest. I mean, over and over, right into the Creighton logo. And he dominated him. Because a lot of times today, players are just not used to a 6'8", 245, 260 pound guy who does not give a crap about shooting a 15-foot jumper. He took his shoulder and he went right at the guy, and that was novel. Because most guys today who are 6'8", they want to shoot.
Yeah.
So Derek Walker had a skill that actually took opponents by surprise, in my opinion. Rink Mast is, and this sounds sort of ironic, more traditional to what we see of big men today.
Yeah.
He's 6'10", he's 230, he can shoot the three, he will draw a defender out, and in drawing that defender out, he'll be able to have the ball above his hands outside the three-point line and pass that way. And Derek Walker didn't do that much because nobody thought he was shooting the ball from there.
Yeah.
So that's important. Like
It is.
How Rink Mast replicates what Walker did may determine how well they play this season.
Yeah. I think, to your point earlier about the way Casey cuts, I think he's a guy who can really benefit from Mast being there, a guy who can draw the defense out, open up the paint for guys to cut and drive. So, I think it's interesting. Nebraska hasn't had a whole lot of guys like him in recent years. Big men who can step out and shoot the three.
No, they haven't.
The way that he can. So,
Isaac Copeland could,
Yeah.
and that was about 5 years ago.
And so, I'm
but Isaac didn't do a lot of the things that Mast is going to be asked to do. Isaac wasn't passing the ball much.
Yeah.
He was a scorer. Rink's going to be asked to be kind of a point forward, point center.
Yeah. Hoiberg has said he's a guy who can even bring the ball up if they need him to.
The best shooting maybe the best shooter in Nebraska basketball history was 6'11", and his name was Brian Conklin. He was, Brian Conklin. And then he played on a team with the best three-point shooter in school history, Kerry Cohorn. And they shot the shit out of him. I think Conklin was like 56% his senior year. It was an amazing number. And he only shot like 95 of them because people just guarded the heck out of him because he couldn't drive. He wasn't a driver. We'll see with Mast, because if he's able to draw people out, then one of two things got to happen. He's got to give the ball up, or he's got to find cutters. And I guess the third thing he could do is drive. That's the one thing Walker could do, is if he got the ball above the paint, and he squared up on you, it was like trying to tackle a tight end who's 260 pounds and has a full head of steam. It was actually really hard. And I understand why people feel the way they do about Mast's three-point shooting ability. I agree. But Walker did something that a lot of people can't do, and they struggled to stop it.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see how it goes with Mast. Okay, let's go to Creighton. So they had Big East Media Days yesterday. Creighton is picked second in the Creighton is picked second in the Big East, and Marquette was picked to win it. Third place is Connecticut, which is one spot lower than they finished last year in the Big East, even though they won the national championship. And then fourth, I think, was Villanova. And everybody's kind of looking at this Villanova team because I think there's a sense that, and Joel believed this too, A, they got the right coach, and I'm impressed with that guy, Neptune. But B, that they added just a couple of pieces, and the team that they were at the end of the year, which was hard to stop, is going to be that much better this year. So it's almost like they got four teams that are like top 10 quality teams. Villanova's 22nd to start, but I think they're going to be better than that. And Creighton has a lot of pieces. They know, in many ways, they know who they are. In the offseason, and all Creighton fans know this, they lost Ryan Nembhard to Gonzaga, and they lost Arthur Kaluma to Kansas State. I think if you were to ask most CU fans how they felt about the second departure, they'd be like, well, there were things that Kaluma did that a lot of people can't do, but there were also times when in the NCAA tournament he's going against a Guica rope and he gives up two huge baskets at the wrong time. That Kaluma just wasn't dialed in when he was at Creighton. I think people feel differently about Nembhard. I think everybody views that as a pretty considerable loss. Yeah. Nembhard was a hard running point guard who could push the pace. Now, he didn't always get to the rim. In fact, he didn't often get to the rim when he was going all the way down the floor. But that taxes a defense over the course of 40 minutes. And so it was striking to me that Greg McDermott referred to Nembhard yesterday on Big East as R2. He's still referring to him by his nickname. I think that they're always going to be fond of that guy. Yeah. He was a great player at Creighton. So he's gone, and he has been, in theory, in some ways, replaced by Stephen Ashworth, who was a Utah State guard, great shooter, 44%, in the Mountain West, which is not a joke league. Yeah. Okay? And now, you had mentioned the thing about Alec shooting. Well, he was shooting in the Summit, and no offense, but that ain't the Mountain West. Well, Ashworth shot 44% in the Mountain West, which, I think sent 4, maybe 5 teams to the NCAA tournament last year, including San Diego State, which made it all the way to the final. So he's no joke. He can shoot. And one of the things that McDermott said yesterday about Ashworth is he's a guy that, unlike Nembhard, who was a point guard and always was circling back to the ball when he didn't have it in his hands, and when you have a guy that always wants to get the ball, what happens? It clogs things up. Your sets aren't what you want them to be because he's always going back for the ball. That Ashworth understands spacing, and that he'll stay in a spot, and he'll let Trey Alexander, who we'll get to in a moment, kind of do what he does, and then Baylor Shireman do what he does. And so on that level, I think Ashworth kind of fits philosophically what McDermott wants. I don't know that he's going to be quite the player that Nembhard could be. Creighton could be down by 7, and Nembhard could go get a layup just like that. And now they're down 5. And it took 4 seconds. He was good at that kind of stuff, especially in the second halves of games. So Ashworth is one of the guys that they'll have in the backcourt. Trey Alexander is another. Have you had a chance to watch Trey much?
Not a whole lot, not beyond just, regular college basketball viewing. Yeah.
I think Joel would tell you that he's not the best athlete on the floor, but he's got a really good sense of the game, and he's got a little bit old man game to him. Yeah. He's crafty. He can just do some things when he's shooting. He can move his body. He can draw fouls. He makes free throws. He became a dang good shooter last year. I've grew up with Creighton basketball, and so I would say that of all the players that I've watched over my lifetime of Creighton basketball, he's in the top 5. That guy is fun to watch. Doug's in there. Trey's in there. I think, I was a little kid, but I put Bob Harstad in there, and there's a few others too that are just like this. Kyrie Thomas, Taz is fun to watch. So Trey's in that group, and I think he's going to be a first or second team All-American. He reminds me of a little bit of Johnny Juzang, who was at UCLA. Yeah. Just a little bit of Caleb Love's not the person I'm thinking of because he takes a lot of dumb shots, but when Caleb Love's playing well, Caleb Love, who's now at Arizona, So that's another guard that's going to be back there. And then I don't know what you want to call Baylor Shireman, but Baylor Shireman's kind of the third of the big three.
Yeah.
Played at South Dakota State, played at Creighton last year. Fun player to watch, has a lot of talent with his hands. He's good at that. Makes a lot of flashy plays, behind the back stuff, pretty shots, can shoot it from anywhere. Kind of has no conscience, just will shoot it. He's watched a lot of Steph Curry and Dame Lillard. He just does the pull-up three. And Casey kind of does too, but Casey doesn't usually bring the ball up.
Yeah.
So a lot of times with Casey, he's not bringing the ball up. It's somebody pitching it to him.
Yeah.
And, okay, take your 32-footer. Baylor he brings the ball up and he just jacks it, and the crowd never quite knows exactly what to do with it, but he makes them about 25-30% of the time. So there's that. Those are probably your main. I don't know. Baylor's not really a point guard or a guard or anything. He's more of a wing. But also in the backcourt, you have Jonathan Lawson, who they got from Memphis. He's kind of a defensive starter, probably a wing too. Like that guy's fire. So he's the guy on Creighton's team who looks like he could get somebody in a fight.
He's the Josiah Alec of.
And I like him. I think it's crucial that you have a player on your team who is Pat Beverly.
Yeah.
You must have a player on your team who knows how to push the buttons of the opponent and can get them off their game. And Creighton has one. I don't know if they had one last year, but they have one now. And I think this guy can help them even if he doesn't average more than 5 points a game. What I didn't know until Joel told me is that his brothers played at KU. So Dedrick Lawson, and it's a whole family of Lawsons.
I guess I didn't realize that was the same.
It's
same
all
family.
It's all the same family. And so you remember, there were two Lawsons that played at KU 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so Jonathan is one of them, and then I think there was a fourth one. There might be a fifth one, a fifth brother. And so they're all part of that. So yeah, they're all part of that group. And I don't know that any of them ended up at Memphis eventually, because I know both Lawsons, I think, at one time went to Memphis, and then they went to KU. Jonathan was at Memphis, but then he left and went to Creighton. So he's another guy back there, Francisco Farabello. He is back for a fifth or sixth year. He's a transfer from TCU that was sort of their designated corner three-point shooter last year. That didn't always go well, but he made 2 huge threes against Baylor in the second round game, and that kind of redeemed a lot of things. Like, oh boy, if you're going to get 6 points from this guy, look at that. So Farabello, I think, is another name back there. Josiah Dotzler, who was a freshman, a true freshman. His older brother Josh played at Creighton about 15 years ago. Josiah comes from a big family, so there's a few siblings between Josh and Josiah. Josiah's a great defender, so he was one of the best players in recent high school history. He can score, but he really can defend. And so I'd be curious to see if they find a role for him, or if they basically tell Josiah, let's wait a year and let's try to find something else for you to do. They lost a couple guys in the offseason, guys that decided to transfer, who were, what they were. So they've got a couple of young guards that I don't know if they'll play. Sterling Knox is a freshman from Red Rock Academy in Las Vegas. That's one of these relatively new basketball factories. What's the big one there? I can't even remember the name.
In Vegas?
In Vegas. Near Vegas. In Vegas.
Yeah. I feel like Dylan knows this one.
Finley Prep. Dylan over here. You can say it on the mic. So I think Red Rock's one of the newer ones. Red Rock Academy, Sterling Knox. I don't know that he's going to play much. They have another guy from that same school, Shane Thomas. One of them is a walk-on. I'm sorry for saying I don't exactly know which of the two. So that is their group of guards. Then we go to the wings. And if you want to ask me something, you certainly can. I don't know if you're interested or not. Okay, the wings on this team, in so much that they have them. Shireman's kind of a wing, but we just talked about him. Mason Miller, probably the leading candidate to be the starting 4. Skinny guy, 6'9", 190, athletic. Gives you a flash every time he plays, but then there's also a possession where he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. Son of Mike Miller? Son of Mike Miller.
Sounds right.
Son of
Yeah.
Mike Miller, yes. So son of Mike Miller. The team now has 3 guys from Mike Miller's high school that he coaches down there. Lawson's one of them, Miller's one of them, and Brock Weiss, one of the great names of all time, is a true freshman center on this team. We'll get to him in a second. So Mason Miller's one of them. Isaac Trout, interesting player. Superstar at Grand Island, used to be triple and quadruple teamed out there. Left the state, was a top 100, top 50 recruit. Left to go to Virginia, didn't play in Virginia. Redshirted. Seems like it was a mutual decision between he and Tony Bennett. Wasn't going to stay. Transfers back. Goes to Creighton. I think it's an interesting fit. Isaac can shoot the 3. There's a lot of things he can do. I know Nebraska was ticked that Trout didn't go to Nebraska. Not maybe in the transfer portal, but the first time around, Nebraska really recruited him hard. And then he made one of those like left turn, like, I'm going to go to Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't think it fit out there. So he's back. I think they would love for him to be the 4, but I think it could be Mason Miller. And I think Trout's going to have to play into it. He's a redshirt freshman. Played a small Class A school, but a small town, and relatively small town of Grand Island. And they kind of traveled around, and he was the whole show. So he's probably still growing as a player. And then Jason Green, who was in the same class as Trout, in some ways was a better player than Trout at times. He's a redshirt freshman as well, and he's also at that position. 6'8", 230. His dad, I believe, played at UNO. Jason's got a soft touch. He's another guy with kind of an old man game. He's got a little bit of everything. And then you go to the front court. And it kind of starts with Ryan Kalkbrenner, who became an elite player, but he had the big game against NC State where he scored 31 or whatever. He was kind of unstoppable. They'll have to build chemistry between he and the guards because Nemahard and Kalkbrenner had a great chemistry. He's a great defensive center because he alters shots and blocks shots without fouling. And there was only one team. Well, 2 teams. Nebraska got in him, and Connecticut got in him. So he struggled against Connecticut the 2 times they played, especially out there with Sonogo and then the other guy. The other guy's huge, too, Klingon.
Yeah.
Struggled against UConn. And then in the Elite 8 game against San Diego State, and I'm sure there are things that Creighton team thinks about in that game and says, if we are this year, when we get in that spot again, this will not happen. There were just 1 or 2 possessions in that game where things that he would normally flush or hit as a layup, they just bodied him up. And San Diego State was the most physical team in the NCAA tournament last year. They weren't very skilled, but they were physical, and they physicaled Creighton. And if that game's just straight up skill, and it's whatever, Creighton wins by 10. But San Diego State elbowed them and put everything they could physically into Creighton, and it bothered them just enough. They only scored 58 points. So I think those are probably teaching points, and then they want Kalkbrenner to shoot 3s. And I think part of that is to get him to the NBA, and part of that is to create a threat, similar to what Rick Mass can do. If you've watched Kalkbrenner shoot 3s, it's not a natural thing for him, but he's getting there. And then Fred King is the backup. Really good offensive player in short bursts. Like, that guy can score 8 points in 10 minutes. And it's pretty. He played last year against Marquette when Kalkbrenner had mono. And he had a good game against good players. But he wasn't great defensively in that game, and I think that's probably the thing they've worked on. I'd say Fred King is one of the 3 or 4 best backup centers in the country. And he would start at a lot of schools. And so he will start next year, provided he's still here, because this will be it for Kalkbrenner. And then Brock Weiss, about whom I know very little, except that he has a great name. So they've got it. Like, Creighton is one of the few programs where you're like, man, you guys really have it set, don't you? Like, you got your center, you got your backup, and then you got this guy with a cool name that's going to be the backup next year. So, like, that's one of the programs where you kind of tip your cap because they've figured out how to create a pipeline. Connecticut has it too.
Yeah.
They've got their guy, and then apparently they got another guy that was hurt all last year who was going to be their guy until he got hurt, and then Klingon became their guy, their backup. So that'll be interesting to watch. Creighton's got a great roster. I think they certainly have a more higher firepower than Nebraska does. Nebraska beat that team last year, though, and this year they play it in Lincoln. I think Nebraska's to the point now where they kind of throw out the records.
Yeah.
I don't think Fred Hoiberg's afraid of Creighton. I think Tim Miles had a weird thing about beating him, which he finally did, but they lost some games badly that they shouldn't have. So we'll see. I think Nebraska's got more guys who will play.
Yeah.
I think Creighton knows who its 8 or 9 guys are going to be, and that's a pretty solid 8 or 9.
Yeah.
That's my sense of it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I would agree with you on that, on both counts. Of Nebraska has more guys who will play. Creighton's a little more established. I'm wondering if what you were saying, where this Creighton roster stands, what do you think is a reasonable expectation for Creighton this season? Coming within a couple seconds of the Final Four a year ago.
Right.
What do you think? I mean, I imagine anyone there will say, it's national championship this season, but what do you think is a reasonable expectation for this season for Creighton?
I think the Final Four is reasonable. That doesn't mean you're going to make it.
Yeah.
You could have a great team and not.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, yeah. So.
And I'm not talking Purdue. I'm not talking what happened to Purdue. That's not going to happen to Creighton because Purdue had 2 freshman guards and a center who can only do so much when he's getting hammered by 4 guys, and they won't call every foul.
Yeah.
They won't officiate NCAA tournament games that way, where it's like, we're going to call 40 fouls on this team, and Zach Ease is going to go to the line 37 times. They're not going to treat him like Wilt Chamberlain. They're not. So I'm not talking Purdue. I'm more talking they could get to the Sweet 16 like Alabama did and run into the wrong team.
Yeah.
And Alabama ran into the wrong team with San Diego State. And I can't even remember now. Florida Atlantic made the Final Four, and they beat K-State.
K-State, yeah.
But who did FAU beat in the second round? They were number 1 seed.
It would have had to be a 1 seed, yeah, because they were a 9. Who was that? Yeah.
I don't remember. And I'm not talking Arizona, who's soft.
Yeah.
They are. Creighton's not soft. Arizona was soft. They're always soft. Arizona hasn't been hard-edged for a while. Yeah. So, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they could go to the Sweet 16 and run into the wrong team and lose by 3. Kansas had some of the greatest Kansas basketball teams of all time didn't make it past the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
And but what I will say, and you're a college basketball guy too, I don't think the top is real tough. Like I don't think Kansas is a dominant number 1. Marquette's number 4, and they're a fun team to watch, but that's not the best number 4 I've ever seen.
They disappointed in the tournament, right? If I'm remembering correctly, yeah.
Who was super talented. So that was effed up. So Marquette played, I believe, Texas in the second round, or they played Miami of Florida. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was Texas. Yeah, Texas. Indiana played Miami.
So they're playing an all-star team that underachieved in the regular season and fired their coach. That was a weird deal. Texas was really more like they beat the pants off of Creighton down in Austin. So that was more of a screwy. That year Kentucky was an 8 playing Wichita State as a 1. It wasn't fair to Marquette. But, that kind of stuff happens sometimes where they seed it based on accomplishment and not based on, okay, everybody knows this is a 3, and we're going to pretend they're a 7 when they're not. That happens. But I don't think the top is that tough, right?
No.
Like KU's in there.
I don't think there's
Who's
an
2?
Obvious.
Who is 2?
Is it Purdue?
Oh, no. That's all you got. That's all you got to say. What a weird team.
Purdue.
And for sure, they're well coached and they're tough and all the rest. Now they'll probably, in my opinion, they'll be better this year for the tournament because those 2 guys are not freshmen.
Yeah.
They'd never gone through that before. Lawyer and Smith.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
Lawyer.
you could tell that Lawyer especially was just exhausted down the stretch. Like he ran out of gas by the end.
Duke's number 2.
Duke's number 2.
Okay. Nobody knows anything about them. I don't know anything about them. Do you know anything about Duke? Could you tell me who their starting 5 is?
No.
Obviously, the voters can.
Kyle Filipowski.
Sure. Michigan State. Well, they got a good coach.
Yeah.
And if they're playing, they're good.
And they're bringing back most of who they had last year, plus some pretty talented freshmen.
Yeah, they're good. Marquette, UConn, Houston. I mean, okay. Sure. Yeah. Houston's tough, for sure. Yep. I mean, it's a miserable brand of basketball they play, but whatever. Tennessee and Florida Atlantic's 10.
Felt a little reactive to run last year. Like
I agree with you, but that underlines what's going on. Like it's Florida Atlantic, they're 10th. Okay. If they're the 10th best team, then the ceiling is low, the floor is high, and there's a lot of teams that are smushed. Yeah. And I think that's probably where it's at. Miami's 13, Arizona's 12. Well, they're soft. And then, I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch. Wisconsin's 26th. Yeah. And I watched that team all year, all last year, and I'm just like,
Or Ken Pom was weirdly high on Wisconsin too.
Yeah, they're like 28th in that, or 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at that today.
Yeah, Wisconsin traditionally has been best when they have when they've got a star. I feel like the typical Wisconsin team is, it's not flashy, it's not glamorous, but their best teams have been when they've had a Frank Kaminsky, a Johnny Davis, and I don't think this team has one of those guys.
No, we're all big fans of Chucky here in Omaha. I don't know that Chucky's that guy. Yeah. He's a glue guy for sure, and they'll rely a lot on Crowell. So we'll see what happens. But I was looking at Ken Pom today. We'll end with this. So Ken Pom had Nebraska going 17-14, winning its first 7 games, and then losing those 3 that you would expect them to lose. 17-14, 9-11 in the Big Ten. I can't remember what they had Creighton. Nebraska was 58th. Creighton was 12th. 58th, by the way, is the highest that I think they've been preseason in a long time. Yeah. And higher than all but 4 of the teams that in Ken Pom's 25-year history. So Nebraska's only had 4 teams that I think are above 58. And their teams, well, you don't know any of them, but I think you were like 4. Whatever year. What year were you born?
99.
Okay, so you were 5.
December of 99. So
the highest rated team they've ever had in the Ken Pom final listings was 39th. That's it. Yeah. And it was an 04 team with Nate Johnson and Andrew Drevo that was coached by Barry Collier that nobody could tell you anything about. Other than they went 18-13, they beat Creighton in the NIT, and they've only had like 4 teams, and all but one of them nondescript that were in that because for whatever reason. So. You're inheriting, covering a program that has not been looked upon kindly by Ken Pom.
No.
Sometimes in the hundreds. Okay, that is our Half Court Press podcast for this week. We'll be back next week with, we'll see. Maybe we'll have an update on who we hire to be Creighton beat writer, and then we'll talk about the season. My God, it's almost here. We'll preview the opener that Nebraska has. And Creighton's exhibition game, because for some reason they have to play that on November 3rd. For Wilson, I'm Sam, and thanks for listening.